Imagine sitting on the edge of your bed, freshly awake, phone in hand, already swimming through messages, updates, and to-do lists before your feet even touch the floor. You check the time. You feel behind. But behind what, exactly? The world tells you that you're free, that you have agency, that this is the best time in history to be alive. And yet, something inside you feels muted, disconnected, like you're existing in a life you didn't entirely choose. We live in a society that sells freedom like a product, wraps purpose in productivity, and defines identity through algorithms. But what if it's all part of a larger illusion? What if the freedom you think you have is actually a scam, one designed to keep you performing, consuming, and obeying? This is the great deception of modern life. And the moment you begin to see it is the moment you begin to wake up. You choose your breakfast. Maybe it's a protein bar or a green smoothie. It feels healthy, empowered. But who told you that was the right choice? Who shaped your idea of what's good to begin with? You didn't design the product, market the brand, or question the ingredients. You simply picked from the shelf of pre-approved options. And this, right here, is where the deception begins, the illusion of choice. It's not freedom if all the paths were built for you by someone else. At work, you feel ambitious, maybe even proud. You meet deadlines, attend calls, chase the next promotion. But deep inside, a quieter voice asks, is this really success or just obedience? The system rewards the productive, the consistent, the palatable. It tells you you're winning, as long as you don't stop to ask why you're playing in the first place. We're taught to chase goals without ever questioning who wrote the scoreboard. Your free time? It's curated. Your music playlists are suggested. Your vacations are inspired by trending posts. Your hobbies come in starter kits with matching aesthetics. Even your moments of rest are monetized. A yoga mat, a candle, a productivity journal labeled self-care. You're encouraged to relax, but only in ways that can be branded, shared, or sold. Stillness without an audience is seen as laziness, silence as emptiness. But what if that's the real space where truth begins? Scroll through social media and it feels like connection. But you're not seeing people, you're seeing profiles, edited fragments, highlight reels designed to impress. You start to wonder, am I falling behind? So you post, you filter, you perform. And unknowingly, you feed the same system. That's starving your authenticity. You think you're expressing yourself, but you're actually reinforcing your cage, one hashtag, one dopamine hit at a time. The most powerful part of the scam. It feels good, just good enough. A weekend getaway, a successful project, a compliment on your outfit, a brief moment of validation before the hunger returns. You chase it again, but it's never enough. And it's not your fault. The system was designed to keep you seeking, never arriving. You've been taught to earn rest, to deserve love, to prove your value, but you were already enough. You've just been too distracted to remember. And here's where it gets dangerous. The more you conform, the more you're rewarded. The algorithm gives you reach. Your job gives you security. Your friends give you approval. But all of it is conditional. Behave, smile, succeed. One misstep, one honest confession, one act of rebellion, and the system pulls back its approval like oxygen, so you stay in line. You call it balance, but deep inside, you know it's not. If you're feeling this way, you're not alone. Leave us a comment. Have you ever felt like your freedom was just an illusion? Subscribe if you want more content that challenges what is usually accepted without thinking. Let's talk about the Pathama. Voice in your head, the one that tells you to keep going, keep doing, keep proving. Where did it come from? Was it your own voice or one you inherited? Since childhood, we've been programmed. Gold stars, grades, praise for being quiet, being helpful, being productive. We learned early that worth is something you earn, not something you are. And now, as adults, we chase metrics instead of meaning, promotions instead of peace, validation instead of value. Even rest has been hijacked. You meditate to be more focused at work. You exercise not for joy, but for aesthetics. You read books and feel guilty if they're not educational. Leisure has become another branch of productivity. You must justify everything you do with a purpose, a benefit, an outcome. But life isn't a business strategy. You're not a brand. You're a person, complex, flawed, beautiful. And yet, society trains you to manage yourself like a product on a shelf. And when you finally break down, when the mask cracks and the fatigue spills over, what does the system offer you? A course, a retreat, a subscription box. It sells you the illusion of healing while avoiding the truth of your suffering. Real healing requires silence, honesty, time, none of which are profitable. That's why the scam continues. It doesn't fix you, it manages you, keeps you functional, not free, productive, not peaceful. And you've mistaken survival for success. Look closely and you'll see it. Everywhere you turn, you're being optimized. Your attention, your time, your emotions. You're asked to multitask, to stay reachable, to produce results. But the more you adapt, the more you lose yourself. You don't remember what boredom feels like, because every spare second becomes an opportunity for content. You don't remember solitude, because even your most personal thoughts are shaped by what's shareable. You're constantly connected, yet deeply alone. The scam works because it's subtle. No one forces you. You volunteer, you perform, you smile, you post. And every time you comply, the illusion tightens. You think you're evolving when you're actually just conforming more efficiently. True change isn't about fitting better into the system. It's about questioning whether the system deserves you in the first place. Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something purely because it made your soul feel alive, not your feed, not your boss, not your ego? Here's the secret the world won't tell you. You don't need to do more. You need to remember. Remember who you were before the world convinced you that you were broken. Before you believed that your value was in your output. That's where your real power lies, not in how well you play the game, but in your ability to walk away from it. Reclaim your time. Reclaim your choices. Reclaim your attention. Because no system, no scam, no illusion is stronger than a mind that decides to wake up. And when you finally grant yourself that permission, not to achieve, not to improve, but simply to exist, you begin to feel something unfamiliar but profoundly true. It's subtle at first. You start noticing how long you've been performing at work, in friendships, even in front of yourself. You catch yourself rushing to fill silence with noise, motion, distraction, as if stillness might reveal something dangerous. But that danger you fear is actually honesty. The kind of honesty that strips away ambition and asks, what's left? Who are you without goals, without image, without obligation? It's not a rhetorical question, it's an invitation. You start to remember how your thoughts once moved before they were filtered by what would be acceptable or intelligent or likable. You start to remember the version of you that didn't need metrics to feel valuable. And it's in those memories that the spell begins to weaken. You notice how the system has created a vocabulary of self-worth that depends entirely on transaction, what you can offer, how you can serve, how efficiently you can convert your time into results. But life doesn't work like a spreadsheet. Real meaning is not measurable. Joy isn't scalable. Peace doesn't trend. And yet, every part of modern life tries to convince you otherwise. You feel guilty for resting. You apologize for your needs. You think you have to be extraordinary just to be enough. But what if the most radical thing you could do is be ordinary on purpose? Not average, not passive, but rooted in the kind of presence that doesn't need validation to be real. The system hates this kind of presence because it can't monetize it. There's no app for being okay with who you are. There's no influencer package for self-acceptance. And so it floods your senses with endless reasons to feel lacking, comparison, competition, curated ideals that seem just out of reach. Think the problem is you, your discipline, your mindset, your habits. But the truth is, the entire structure is designed to keep you feeling like you're never quite there. Because a person who believes they're whole won't buy what they don't need. They won't chase approval they don't crave. They won't serve a narrative that doesn't serve them back. That kind of person is dangerous, not loud, not rebellious in the traditional sense, but inwardly sovereign. Harder to manipulate, slower to react, quieter but deeper. And the moment you realize that's possible, that you don't need to escape to begin healing, you just need to pause, everything starts to shift. You stop editing your emotions to fit the room. You stop pretending you're okay when your soul is tired. You stop accepting that burnout is just part of the deal. And in that space, something beautiful returns. Clarity. Not the kind that tells you what to do next, but the kind that reminds you that you already knew. You just forgot. You forgot that your body was never meant to run at full speed forever. You forgot that your worth isn't conditional. You forgot that the person you were before all this pressure, noise, and image management still exists, waiting patiently beneath the version of you the world applauds. You don't need to fight the system with rage. You disarm it every time you choose presence over performance, enough over excess, truth over image. It loses its grip, not because you attack it, but because you stop feeding it. And when you stop feeding it, something curious happens. The world doesn't fall apart, the illusion does. The deadlines, the branding, the urgency, all of it begins to seem smaller, less sacred, less necessary. You look around and realize how much of your stress was inherited, not chosen. How many of your desires were planted, not born. You begin to see your schedule not as a sign of success, but as a symptom of distraction. You start to question why being booked and busy ever became a badge of honor. When did exhaustion become a status symbol? When did sleep become negotiable? And more importantly, who benefits from you being too tired to think critically? The more you slow down, the more you see clearly. The system isn't built to support human flourishing. It's built to keep you useful, compliant, distracted. You were told to chase productivity as a path to freedom, but you were never meant to be a machine. You were told to build a brand, to scale yourself, to become an asset, but you were never meant to be a commodity. Every time you deny your limits, every time you override your instincts to meet expectations, you reinforce the very structure that's draining you. But when you reclaim your pace, when you give yourself permission to be inefficient, unpolished, and unapologetically human, you become something society doesn't know how to process: unpredictable, unbranded, unbothered. And in that unpredictability, there is power. Because nothing threatens the system more than a person who no longer fears being misunderstood. Someone who values rest over rush, depth over visibility, silence over applause. These are not small rebellions. They are acts of rehumanization. In a culture that rewards automation, you begin to change not because you've added something new, but because you've stopped pretending. The life you truly want doesn't start when you accomplish enough. It starts when you subtract the need to constantly justify your existence. You stop explaining yourself. You stop comparing your timeline to others. You stop needing a reason to feel tired, to feel lost, to feel unmotivated. And instead, you meet those feelings with curiosity. You allow them to speak without silencing them. Because you realize emotions are not glitches in your programming. They're signals from the self you buried under efficiency. They're the original language of your being, and they've been drowned out by calendars and checklists for far too long. So you begin to listen. And in that listening, you don't hear answers, you hear yourself. Not the version of you that's easy to understand, but the version that's complex, contradictory, evolving. The version that doesn't fit neatly into a caption. The version that's been watching your life from the inside, waiting patiently for you to turn around and finally say, I see you. And when you do, when you make eye contact with your own truth, everything softens. Not because your problems vanish, but because they finally belong to someone real. Someone awake. Someone who no longer lives to prove they're alive. You are not your momentum. You are not your metrics. You are not your mask. You are something far deeper than all of that. And the more time you spend in that depth, the more intolerable the performance becomes. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You have changed in ways that are difficult to articulate, but impossible to unfeel. There's a discomfort now in going back to the old roles, the automated smiles, the endless striving. You sit in meetings and feel detached from the language of optimization and scaling. You scroll through social feeds and feel the hollowness behind curated captions. You hear people talk about grinding, leveling up, never stopping, and it no longer inspires you, it exhausts you. Because once you've touched even a sliver of your unmasked self, everything performative becomes unbearable. You start to feel allergic to surfaces. You crave realness, not the kind that's aestheticized or edgy, but the kind that is unedited, slow, sometimes awkward, and always sincere. You long for conversations that don't revolve around what you do, how far you've come, or what you're planning next. You just want to be. And it's terrifying how rare that space is, how few places allow it, how few people even know what to do with it. But that's where your power begins to crystallize. In not needing to be understood to stay true. In not shrinking your authenticity to stay liked. In not performing peace when you're actually unraveling. You stop managing perceptions and start honoring reality. You begin to notice how much of your time was spent explaining your worth, proving it, performing it, packaging it. Now you begin reclaiming it, quietly, internally. You cancel plans not to escape, but to reconnect. You stop numbing discomfort and start learning from it. You let yourself mourn the years you spent pretending. And then, gradually that mourning turns into movement, not the frantic kind you once knew, but a slower, more grounded kind. You walk without rushing. You eat without distractions. You breathe without earning it. And in these ordinary acts, you begin to rebuild your life from the inside out, not around expectations, but around energy. Around what actually feels like you. Not the old you who was applauded for being agreeable and productive, but the deeper self who existed before anyone told you who to be. That version of you isn't an ideal to chase or a goal to reach. It's a memory, a presence, a state. And you return to it not through effort, but through surrender, through remembering. You don't need a rebrand, you need rest. You don't need to pivot, you need to pause. You don't need to level up. You need to let go. This is what the system fears most. People who no longer need external permission to trust their inner knowing. Because they become less dependent, less predictable, less controlled. And slowly you notice others waking up too. Not through dramatic revolutions, but in subtle shifts. A friend who turns off notifications. A coworker who says, I don't. No, without shame. A stranger who chooses honesty over likability. These moments are seeds. They don't go viral, but they are vital. Because they remind you that awakening isn't a destination, it's a return to presence, to clarity, to sovereignty. And as more people return, the spell weakens. Not because the system crumbles overnight, but because its foundation, compliance begins to dissolve. That is the quiet revolution. Not louder arguments, but deeper awareness. Not more answers, but better questions. Not control, but connection. And connection doesn't begin with others, it begins with yourself. But here's the part no one tells you. Connecting with yourself can feel like loneliness at first. Not because you're alone, but because you're no longer distracted, no longer diluted. You sit with your thoughts and they feel unfamiliar, like guests you forgot you invited. The silence is loud. The stillness stings. It's not peaceful in the beginning, it's confronting. You remember things you buried. You notice emotions you labeled as inconvenient. You feel grief for the life you performed, for the parts of yourself you left behind just to fit in. And this grief is sacred. It means you're waking up. It means you're returning. You start noticing how often you used to reach for noise, not because you wanted sound, but because you were afraid of your own voice. You begin recognizing the ways you filled your calendar, not to feel productive, but to avoid sitting still long enough to notice the emptiness. And slowly, you begin making different choices, not dramatic ones. You don't quit your job or sell everything or move to a mountain. No, the shift is quieter, deeper, more powerful. You begin saying no when your body tenses. You begin breathing before replying. You begin being honest when someone asks, "How are you?" You begin showing up as someone who isn't performing wellness, but is actually searching for wholeness. And in that search, something softens in you. You stop trying to prove you're worth loving. You stop editing your feelings to be more palatable. You stop acting like you're okay when you're clearly unraveling. And instead of shame, you begin to feel spacious. Spacious enough to feel fully. Spacious enough to be complex. Spacious enough to hold joy and grief in the same breath. That's when the real reconnection begins. Not with some idealized version of yourself, but with the human underneath. The hustle, the one who doesn't need to always be okay. The one who is enough in their rawness, their mess, their quiet truth. You begin to see your own reflection not as a project to fix, but as a person to finally meet. And when you see yourself this way, with gentleness instead of judgment, it changes how you see everything else. You look at others and realize they're performing too. They're rushing too. They're tired, terrified, and trying to hold it all together, just like you. And instead of comparing, you feel compassion. Instead of competing, you feel connected. You start to understand that we're not meant to impress each other, we're meant to witness each other. And in that witnessing, something sacred returns to your life. Not certainty, not perfection, but presence. A quiet kind of aliveness that doesn't demand attention, but can't be ignored. You carry it with you into the most ordinary places. The elevator, the grocery store, the silence before sleep. And it stays with you, not because you cling to it, but because you've stopped running from it. You've stopped running from yourself. You begin to feel like you're standing on solid ground for the first time in years, not because your life is figured out, but because you're no longer outsourcing your identity to the next trend, the next goal, the next performance. You are here, and you're not lost, you were just distracted. And maybe that's the real shift, realizing that you were never truly lost, just covered. Covered by noise, by pressure, by years of survival dressed up as ambition. You didn't need to be reinvented. You just needed to be uncovered. And the person you find beneath all that noise isn't perfect, but they're real. And that reality holds more power than any mask you've ever worn. So sit with it. Let it break you open. Let it change how you show up. Not as someone who needs to perform peace, but as someone who chooses presence. Because the system is only as strong as your willingness to keep playing the role it gave you. The moment you choose to be fully here, to question, to feel, to slow down, you break its rhythm. And when enough people do that, the rhythm becomes a silence. And in that silence, something new begins. Not a rebellion of noise, but a revolution of remembering. And maybe that's the greatest act of resistance in the modern world. To come back to yourself fully, without apology, and stay there. If this spoke to something buried deep inside you, don't let it end here. The next video on screen is just as important as this one. It's part of the same journey inward. Let it meet you where you are now. Let it be your next step. Because the path home to yourself doesn't end, it deepens. Welcome back. Welcome to yourself. Welcome home.